feels incredibly smooth. 317 frames a second. You can definitely feel the extra smoothness and you just feel more connected to the game. It is here! Ladies and gentlemen, the monitor that I think we've all been waiting for has finally arrived. Dare I say, the ultimate gaming monitor! Again, this is 240Hz, 1440p, but fundamentally this actually has an IPS panel. And a monitor that I really loved last year was the HP Omen 27X. And this was fantastic because it was 1440p and 240Hz, but it was let down by the fact that it was a TN panel. Whereas this is something that should excel in literally all areas, and because it is 16:9, you could quite easily put this in a multi-monitor setup and you'd have the dream setup, right? Corsair's 5000 series is about to change your gaming PC forever. With room for all of the latest and greatest components, you can easily fit and core ginormous graphics cards with ease. Step up your game with Corsair's AirGuide fan technology, and with support for a whopping 10 case fans, you can always get the build that's right for you. You can even choose between glass and mesh panels. The possibilities really are endless. Check out the Corsair 5000 series today with that link down below. This is exactly what we're going to test here today. So we have our lovely Aorus gaming monitor. It hooks up via DisplayPort. They do also have two HDMI 2.0 ports if you want to use this with a console. And for power, it does have a standard kettle lead, which means no power brick. Hooray! In terms of the design, I really do quite like it. There's not really anything particularly different about it. It's hardly the most unique monitor on the market. You do actually have a little bit of RGB on the back, which of course is going to increase your FPS, but it's very solidly built, so we've got plenty of adjustments to the stand and everything, so getting yourself nice and comfortable should be pretty easy. But something that it does have that's really neat is that you can actually hook this up to your Gigabyte Aorus PC and then get live statistics actually broadcast through the monitor itself rather than having to use an OSD, which is pretty cool. What is it with Windows Update that it only does updates when you don't have time for updates? I want to play. I've got a new monitor. 240Hz right out the gate. This is well, it's not the first time I've tried this on, but it's the first time I've plugged it into this computer. 240 frames a second at the top, 120 and then 60. You have something that is super clear at the top, something that is still relatively blurry but easy enough to look at, and then down the bottom you have a 60Hz mess. But let's be honest, you didn't tune into this video to see whether it can show UFOs in a nice sharp manner. You want to know about gaming performance. Is this a really good gaming monitor, and is it actually worth buying? Well, the very first thing to do before we actually jump into a game is show you that while this doesn't have a Gsync module built in, it is actually Gsync compatible. Here we go, Aorus FI27Q-X, Gsync compatible 240Hz. In practice, this can make a huge difference for gamers. Not really so much in multiplayer titles when you are getting around about 200 frames a second, but if you're playing anywhere between, I'd say, 40 to 100 frames a second, it's going to reduce the stutter and tearing that you see in your games. And the beauty is that because this doesn't have a Gsync module built in, it will actually work with AMD FreeSync as well. It's the AMD FreeSync Premium variant, I believe. So if you have something like a 6800 XT, this is going to be the perfect pairing. I should have updated my games before I started filming this. Here we are in Apex Legends, a little bit of the training stage to really maximize that frame rate. And right off the bat, it feels incredibly smooth. If you've never used even a high refresh rate monitor before, it is an enormous difference. Whereas this just takes it to an entirely new level. Because this is an IPS panel, you're getting brilliant viewing angles. I'm actually pretty off angle here and it's looking pretty much the same as it does in the center of the screen. Not really a big deal for gamers, but still something that's quite nice to have. But fundamentally, the color accuracy, the vibrancy, the richness of the panel, it does help your overall enjoyment of the game. I'd say that there's two levels to it. There's being competitive, there's the way that everything feels, but obviously there's the way that everything looks too, and that is going to be massively helped by that resolution and the super accurate IPS panel. I've actually already tested the color accuracy of this display, 100% of sRGB, and I think it was 98% of the Adobe RGB color space, 95 PCI D3. I will say that it does need a little bit of fair calibration to actually get it looking accurate, so really true to life. It has the potential there, but without running the software, everything was just a little bit too red. So while you could definitely change things by eye, it is a lot easier with software. In order to actually get the most out of a 240Hz monitor, you need to pretty much hit two main criteria. You need to be playing games that can reach 240 Hz, and you actually need to have a graphics card that is capable of driving a monitor at that level of frame rates. You're going to need to get an RTX 3080 to properly max this out in every game, and even then you're not going to be able to do it. You can of course lower some settings down, which is what most people are going to probably want to do for multiplayer, but as soon as you start having to dial things back, your perfect experience obviously gets a little bit less perfect. And this is pretty much the main difference between the other 240 Hz monitors that we've actually seen before. Most of them are 1080p, and while that is going to give you inferior image quality, you'll immediately see as soon as we actually swap this over to 1080p that our frame rate has gone up by around about 40-50 frames a second. So it's fantastic that you have this option, and I mean, even if you had a lesser power graphics card, then maybe you could use your computer in 1440p for most things, but when you want to do your serious gaming, you could tone it down to 1080p. That is a very valid option and something you can't do on a 1080p monitor. You can't up-res it to 1440p, but obviously you're still not getting the most out of it. This is pretty much no motion blur. It's crazy, really. You pair this with a super responsive PC, good peripherals, and I'm telling you, the gaming experience you can get from this is going to absolutely show off how bad you are at games, because if you're not able to beat people that are running at 60 frames a second on something like this, then you've got a lot of training to do, I think. Enough mucking about. Time for the real thing. That was a Warzone joke. Again, pay very close attention to the frame rates, around about 160, 170 frames a second. It's definitely a decent improvement versus 120, but most monitors that you find these days that are 1440p high refresh rate will be around about 165. So you're pretty much going to be maxing one of those out and not really getting any more. So yes, you definitely are going to have to take the frame rate into account if you are looking to pick up a monitor like this. Not because you can't run it at a lower frame rate, but just because you won't be getting the most out of it and you'll be spending money on something that you, well, won't be able to get the most out of. But that aside, this is still an absolutely fantastic monitor for playing games on. And I think actually for someone like myself, this really does hit the right sweet spot, because it enables you to really play games like Apex and get the most out of them, but at the same time it's so usable for everything else as well. When you look at monitors that are 360 Hz 1080p, those are so clearly targeted towards people that just play competitive games. Whereas this is more for someone that has a lot of money to spend on a gaming computer and a monitor, but then doesn't really want to compromise in any areas at all. I think the only thing that I guess would make this even better potentially would be 4K resolution, but you wouldn't be able to drive it at that, and if you were then going to down-res it to 1440p, I dare say it wouldn't actually look as good as a native Quad HD panel anyway. But let's step things up a notch and get really competitive with some CounterStrike Global Offensive. 317 frames a second. This is max settings, but we have turned the MSAA down to ×2, because what is the point of 8 anyway? Boom, that's one. Your reaction time is vastly improved versus other monitors. The difference between 170 frames a second in Apex and 240, oh, it's just stopped dying, oh. The thing that astounds me though is the difference between 170 frames a second in Apex versus 240 in Counter-Strike. It's not that it's a complete night and day difference, but you can definitely feel the extra smoothness and you just feel more connected to the game. So if you are going to be playing something like Counter-Strike regularly, that's why you're buying this monitor and everything else is on the side, then that's when it really comes into its own. It is a remarkable bit of kit. One more round, let's go. Oh. That's your competitive fix, but what about something a little bit more visual? Welcome to Control, I think one of the best looking games of this generation really. I think Cyberpunk does beat it in certain areas, but this is a lot more consistent to be honest with you. And even though this is running with DLSS at 1440p, the frame rate is not quite so appetizing as Apex or Counter-Strike go, with around about 70 frames a second, but it still looks and plays really nicely on this monitor. And this is pretty much the other sort of game that you're going to have in your library, one that isn't going to have a sky-high frame rate, and this is exactly where having that FreeSync and Gsync functionality really does start to come in handy. The system works really well, and something that I've found, especially in a lot of cheaper monitors that have FreeSync, is just that they're not really that consistent, and you can find that you get a little bit of stutter and tearing, still make it through. But more commonly you get this horrible flicker, and it's just like, well, why am I turning this technology on if it's just going to make my image arguably even worse? Whereas this just isn't an issue here. There are a couple of other things that we do need to go over with this display. Firstly, HDR is supported, but as it is only HDR 400, it's basically not really going to give you that much of a difference when it comes to the overall experience. So if you're looking to buy this because it has HDR, then to be honest, forget it. And then lastly, we need to talk to you about Backlight Bleed and IPS glow. Is there any? Hey Google, turn off the lights. Surprisingly, on my unit at least, there's pretty much no bleed to speak of at all. You'll always get a little bit. There is some at the top left-hand corner that I can see here, maybe some at the bottom left as well, but overall the uniformity looks really nice to the eye. The only problem, and I am saying this very dramatically looking in the camera, but of course you can't see me now, there is actually one single stuck pixel on my display, which is a little bit unusual for a review sample. It's absolutely tiny, it is stuck on green, so you might be able to get rid of that, but this would be one of those really annoying situations where it's a tiny issue that I think most people would just sort of forget about, but if you're spending all of this money, you don't want any. So let's hope Gigabyte would actually let you return it. This monitor is rather expensive. Its RRP is around about £630, and that puts it roughly £200 more than the street price, if you like, of a 1440p 165Hz monitor. So that's quite a lot. That's getting close to 50% more for frame rate that a lot of people won't even be able to access in the games that they want to play. And remember, this is with an RTX 3070. This is not a slow graphics card by any measure. And yes, you could definitely argue that if you are playing lighter titles like CS, then obviously it's not so much of an issue. But then again, in my eyes, those aren't quite so visual games in the first place. So maybe 1080p 360Hz would make sense if you're just exclusively playing those games. But I think when it comes to longevity, this really does make a whole lot of sense, because no one buys a monitor and replaces it every couple of years. You're probably going to be using this for what, 6, 7, 8 years maybe? And in a couple of years' time, when we get the 4000 series of GPUs, then even more games will be able to run at these sky-high frame rates. But again, £630 is a lot of money, and yes, the street price of that will drop over time. But personally speaking, if I was looking to buy a 16:9 monitor, I would probably go for a 165Hz version, save the money, and then upgrade my PC or even get like a new gaming mouse or something. Because I think the overall difference that that will make to your gaming experience will be better than the difference between 165 and 240Hz. But if you are in the position to be able to enjoy it in all of the games that you play, or just exclusively the games that you play, then it does come highly recommended. And if you're after the best 16:9 gaming monitor that I think I've come across so far, this is it. But you're going to have to pay a bit of money to get there. I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you think that this makes sense? Is this the holy grail of gaming? Would you rather have ultra wide? If you do want to check out current pricing on this, then as always, you can find that links down below with my Amazon affiliate links. And of course, don't forget to smash that like button and leave any comments that you have down below. And of course, while you're down there, don't forget to check out the Corsair 5000 series. The IQ5000X combines the luxurious tempered glass look with huge ventilation gaps and a ginormous 360mm intake right on the side. Serious cooling has never looked this good. Available in black or white, the IQ5000X even comes with 3 PWM SP Elite RGB fans as standard. Learn a little bit more today with that link down below. Thank you so much for watching this video though, I really appreciate it. I'll see you in the next one.